Allow me to greet you with with words from Numbers, where it says, "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace." Good morning. I wonder if you came to my little desk that I work on and you saw my notepad where I wrote directions, maybe to get to some place that you needed to know. And then you also came across maybe a birthday card that I wrote out for someone, but you had not given to them. That sounds a little bit like me. Oh, and maybe you came across my dissertation, um, and you read each of them a little bit at least. I wonder if you would understand that these are different types of writings to be read in different ways for different purposes. I think you probably would. We kind of understand that even very intuitively without even realizing it. Now, sometimes with the Bible, we can actually forget that the Lord passed on to us different types of writings to be read for different occasions in different ways. Let me give you an example. Early on in the first books of the Bible, we are introduced to what we would call salvation history, the history of God's work on behalf of people. Now, that's interesting because a lot of times we make the mistake to think that the main actor or the things to really pay attention to in the Bible are what people do. But in fact, the Bible is a record of God's work, in spite of us, generally. In addition to that salvation history, in the first books of the Bible, after that salvation history, as on that foundation, on that necessary foundation, then there are laws to try to live within that grace and mercy that God has acted on. And you can see these laws are really clear. Eat this, don't eat this. On this day, do this. Now, unfortunately, a lot of times we read the whole Bible as if it were the book of Leviticus, and there's a reason it's not. Specifically, we'll even read Paul's writings as if they're trying to designate out really, really specific laws, when that's not the type of writing Paul was offering. He was writing an epistle, a general instruction. I think this is kind of just important to note because Paul was trained by the greatest biblical scholars of his day. If he wanted to write a book of New Leviticus, he would have written a book of New Leviticus. He knew what he was doing. And so it's important for us not to miss kind of interpret the type of writings, to read the book of Leviticus as if it were Psalms. We understand the difference, right? Oh, that's a good one. The book of Psalms. It's a prayer and song book. The book of Proverbs, the book of wisdom. Again, the book of Proverbs is not saying this one specific Proverbs is always true in every circumstance. It's saying this is a wise saying to guide your life. Generally true. Well, the writing for today in Luke 16 is what we would call a parable. And a parable is trying to disclose some new, dramatic, hard maybe to grasp perspective, some insight, some truth. Imagine if you were locked in a maybe in some type of enclosure for maybe a long time, a year, without being able to see the sunlight. And then all of a sudden, you gained your release. You were released. You escaped, I guess, however. And then all of a sudden, there's this beautiful, bright sun that you see for the first time in so long. That would be such a expansive, immersive, a powerful experience. It'd be hard to distill that in just the 3 little points. That kind of experience really deserves being kind of entered in and just kind of immersed into. And that's what the parables are trying to do. For instance, the parable of, when you find a pearl of value in a field, sell all you have, that you might get it. This is trying to talk to us about the worth of the kingdom of God and how it can reorient our life and really have a priority over those possessions that we think are so important. Well, I'm going to read you a parable from Luke 16 that I think illustrates some of the complexity of reading and beauty of reading a parable. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear from you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do, now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too ashamed to beg. I have decided what I will do. When I'm dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors, one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He said, 100 jugs of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'How much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, make it 80. And his master commended this dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of the age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by the means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into eternal homes.'" This reminds me of someone years ago in ministry who was a new believer and read a certain passage and said, "I would not understand what that's talking about if you had not showed me." And I think that's important to know that the Lord, his nature is relational. At his being, he is a relational God, and he would use relationships with others to help teach his truths, his Bible, his word. Just right off the bat with this parable, a lot of times you can kind of equate or parallel the owner of property to God, but not always. For instance, like in the parable of the unjust judge, Jesus himself says, well, if that's what an unjust judge would do, just imagine what God in all of his mercy, justice, and love does. He's even more so. And I think that juxtaposition is what's going on here. Because this property owner is charging interest. He's getting around charging interest on money, which was outlawed in the Old Testament. And he's charging it on food and those necessary items for life. So really the property owner, it's not only that the manager is shrewd, the property owner is also shrewd. So this doesn't necessarily equate to God. What the manager does is he's probably forgiving the interest that the property owner was charging. So the property owner lended, let's say, 50 bags of wheat, but wanted in return, the bill was going to be 75. So probably what the shrewd manager is doing is forgiving that interest that the property owner should not have charged in the first place. Regardless of all of that, I think the truth that Jesus even specifies, of course, specifies here is, for the sake of mercy, for the sake of grace, for the sake of forgiveness, use all those tools at your disposal to extend God's mercy, God's grace, God's forgiveness to others. If you've got a property owner who's charging interest that he shouldn't, and you're still able to find a way to dispense grace, mercy, and forgiveness, how much more than for the Lord? For you to bind and loose, for you to give forgiveness, for you to show grace, for you to show mercy to others. How much more than for the Lord in the Lord's dealings? And in fact, do this, because by sharing God's mercy and God's grace and God's forgiveness, you will be welcomed into a new community. You will be welcomed into new homes. You will have the Lord bless you through surprising people that you never imagined being welcomed and blessed by. Again, the parable of the shrewd manager, it's not easily distilled just into a few points. But I think the larger truth that it's trying to communicate is that for the sake of forgiveness, for the sake of mercy, for the sake of grace, be active in extending these things to others. And when the time comes that you need it as well, may you have those people in your life. I remember something that Dad said once. I think we were talking about hard times and how to get through hard times. These were years and years ago. And he mentioned that you're never quite as poor as you are when you don't have family around to help you through hard times. If you've got family around to help you through hard times, you still have much, much more than you can even imagine. That's always stuck with me. And I think that's what this parable is getting at. That the Lord is wanting us to forgive and to show mercy and to show grace to others. And He is forming up a new family, our own families, and even bigger, His family, to be there when we will need it too, for the sake of mercy, for the sake of grace, for the sake of forgiveness from others. Well, Jesus goes on and continues to offer some comments on this parable. He says, "Whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in much." You know, Jesus by this point has already commended his disciples, ordained them, I guess, commissioned them to bind and loose, to show mercy to others, to extend his ministry of goodness and good works to others. And he's saying, look, if you can be faithful with this, and at this time in my ministry, by showing mercy, grace, and forgiveness to others, you will be put in charge in much. You will be faithful with much. And whoever is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. I mean, that's unfortunately something that very tragically fits Judas's own. You know, he's dishonest with some of the money, and he's dishonest with much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? What are God's true riches? Well, that would be Jesus' work on the cross. It would be Jesus' teachings. It would be the essence of the Christian faith, that Jesus died, buried, and was resurrected, that he lives on through our work in our communities. And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Again, that's a complex parable, because earlier he says, use this dishonest wealth for the sake of grace, mercy, and truth, for forgiveness of others, and then he's saying you can't serve God and wealth. I would say the overall idea or truth that this parable is communicating is to be faithful. Be faithful with what matters most. In this shrewd manager's case, it was to help people get out of debt that they should never have been in, because the whole system was kind of leveraged. Well, you can work that out for yourself a little bit, what you can be faithful in this week. But what this passage tells us, that even though it might seem like it's little, being faithful with the little things is amazingly important, and it joins God's work in the world. The Lord bless you and keep you and give you peace. My blessings to you from Luke 16 this morning.